Guys, so we'll continue from where we left off last time, which was looking at this idea of how I'm going to draw an English ruler using recursion. Now, instead of me coming up with this recursive function and giving you a solution, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a slightly different approach in this video, where I'm going to connect some of the material that we have learned in week one, which is object-oriented programming in Python, and combine that with some of the material that we're learning this week and last week, which is recursion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with something called a class. I'm going to say, okay, let's create a blueprint. Let's create a blueprint that represents our idea, our abstraction of what an English ruler is. So this is the start of my blueprint. Okay, so that's the start of my blueprint. And how am I even going to create something out of this blueprint? In order to create something out of this blueprint, what I really need is a constructor. I need something which is the special method that, when invoked, would create an instance or an object out of this blueprint. So this magic method in Python, which is basically the init method. So remember, methods that begin with an underscore underscore and ends with an underscore underscore is basically these special magic methods. And in this scenario, this init method is going to be my constructor, which is going to get called whenever I need to create an instance of my English ruler. So this constructor is going to take in a certain set of arguments. So it's going to take a self, which is basically a reference that points to that instance that is invoking any of these instance methods in my class here. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass in a couple of local variables, which is going to be number of inches and major length. Now, if you are confused or if you don't understand why I'm passing these two local variables, number of inches and major length, you might want to go back to the first part of this video and get at least the intuition or understand the problem as to what this number of inches represents and what the major length represents. The number of inches is basically just telling me the number of inches that I need in my on my rendered ruler, and major length is basically the number of dashes that I'm going to use to draw that inch on my English ruler. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these local variables. I'm just going to set them as instance variables in my class here. So I'm going to say let's take number of inches, number of inches, and let it equal to the local variable number of inches. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set the major length to the instance variable major underscore length. Okay, now again, just for clarification purposes, what's important here is, let me just quickly show this to you as a drawing, that these two things over here that are being passed into the methods. Remember, this piece over here and this piece over here are both local variables. These are local, let's use LV for short, local variables. And what I have here is this underscore underscore num underscore inches and underscore underscore major underscore length. These two over here are my instance variable. So what is this code doing over here? The code over here, the first two lines over here, the first line and the second line, all it's doing is it's taking my local variables and setting them, and it's taking the value in these local variables and setting them into my instance variable. Okay, so that's all I'm doing right now so far. Okay, and maybe this might give you at least some intuition now that if this is what the constructor looks like, how do you think the user is going to create? How do you think the user is going to create instances of my English ruler? So at some point, maybe if I have a main block. So let's say if I have a main block that says ruler equals to, let's create one English ruler. And how many parameters does the constructor take in? It takes in two parameters right there, number of inches and major length. So I'm going to say, let's say I need 5 inches drawn on my English ruler, and I would like to have 5 dashes that would represent the major length of each of these inches. And then at some point, maybe I have a really nice method which when invoked, something like ruler dot draw, and that should just draw it out on my console, telling me this is the rendering of my English ruler. But anyways, that's the idea. That's where I would like to end up at. That's where I would like to converge at. When this draw method is completed, I'll have some flavor of recursion and some flavor of helper methods all combined together, showing you how the solution would end up looking. Okay, so let's just erase that line just for time being, and let's just continue getting this implementation completed. Okay, so first what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a helper method. I'm going to have a helper method that says draw line, and what it does is it just takes in the number of ticks, the number of dashes, and I'm going to pass in an optional parameter. Okay, if the parameter isn't sent, it's going to default to just basically a string of length 0 there. Okay, so what's going to happen here? I'm just going to say first thing, line equals to the dash that I would like on my ruler, and I'm going to multiply this with the tick length, with the tick length. Okay, so I know the number of dashes that I need to draw. Okay, so I'm just taking that character and I'm going to multiply it with whatever tick length happens to be. Okay, now if the user has passed in a label, then I'm going to just append, I'm just going to append whatever is my line with the tick label. Okay, so remember from my last video, the only thing that happens to have a label are the integer representation of my inches, meaning 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. I don't have a label for something like 0.5 or 0.25. Okay, so those things do not have a label. The fractional components of my inches do not have a label. It's only a pure integer representations that actually have a label. But this method over here is a non-recursive method, and it's just the helper method. It's just the helper method. Okay, so all it does is it looks at the tick length, it looks at the tick label if provided. If not, it just defaults to the string of length 0, and in this implementation all it does is it just draws that line. So if you're curious as to how this method would look like, let's just try this out. So that's my ruler right there. I'm going to say ruler dot draw line, and let's pass in some tick length. I don't know, let's pass in a 4 there, and you know what, let's not even pass in a tick label right now. Let's just pass in 4 there, and let's see what happens here. So if I take my code and if I just run this as it is right now, okay, so if I run this, and what you're going to see over here is something, a drawing of a line that just happens to have 4 dashes there. Why is it 4? Because I'm passing in the number 4 there. So again, let me just highlight this again, because this is kind of important to get an intuition as to what's going on here. So I'm passing in 4. What is this 4 getting collected as? 4 is getting collected as a tick length. Okay, is the number of dashes that I need on my line, and the number of dashes are right there. That's the output. That's the output that I get back after calling draw line. I haven't passed in anything as a tick label. This parameter hasn't been passed in. There's no second parameter getting passed in into draw line. So tick label has defaulted to a string of basically length of 0. Okay, so this is a string that has a length of 0, and let's just pass in something that happens to be a label now. So let's do this. Let's just take this method as it is, and let's just pass in one more parameter, which is actually my label. So let's say 4 comma maybe a string 4, and let's see what happens now. So if I take this, and if I go back to my learning exceptions, and if I run this, I'm going to see that I'm going to get the number 4. So it's just all it's doing is just string concatenation. That's right there. There's a string concatenation, and it's going to print that thing out. Okay, so what I have so far is just a helper method that actually draws a line out. All right, so at some point maybe this is going to help me. That's what helper methods are. It's going to help me to solve some problem that I'm trying to do in this question here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, let me have another method. Let me have another method called draw interval. And what draw interval actually does is basically is a method that is going to draw the interior of my English ruler. What does that mean? The interior of my English ruler. It means that if this is my English ruler that, let's say, has a major length of 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say that is inch 0. Somewhere I have inch 1, which has a major length of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Halfway between 0 and 1 is zero point 0.5, somewhere around there is zero point 0.5, which is going to have a major length of 3. 1, 2, 3. As you go halfway between an English ruler, the number of dashes reduces by 1. If I go halfway between 0 and zero point 0.5, which is 0.25, the number of dashes are going to be now 2, right? So these are going to be 2 there. And halfway between these two, maybe I might have 1, 1, 1, and 1. Okay, so what I'm saying here, if this is what my English ruler looks like, from going from 0 to 1, okay, I'm going to say that for me to draw everything that happens to be in this region, everything that happens to be in this region, to draw all of this, let's have a method that does all the drawing in the interior between two major inch length between 0 and 1. Let's have that method called draw underscore interval. Okay, so what draw intervals, the purpose of draw interval is to do the rendering of these things, just the interior. It doesn't do this, it doesn't do this. Okay, all it does is the interior. That's why it's called draw interval. It's drawing the interval. This is the interval between 0 and 1, and that's what it does. It just draws the interval. Okay, so if it just draws the interval, okay, and this method is a slightly challenging one, so let's just come back to this in just a few moments. Let's not complete this method just right now. And because we're not completing it just right now, let's just put pass for the time being. Okay, and let's go ahead instead and draw the actual method for drawing the ruler. Okay, so maybe I have a method called draw ruler, which when gets invoked is going to do the actual rendering of the entire ruler. Okay, now what I just said moments ago is that draw interval isn't going to draw the interval between two major integer representation of inches. So if I were to call draw ruler, what is the very first thing it should do? The very first thing it should do is draw inch 0. It must draw inch 0. How does it do that? It's just going to say self.draw, and I'm going to pass in there. Let's see, I have a method called draw line. Draw line is right there. What is draw line taking? It takes in the tick length and it takes in the label. All right, so I'm going to say self dot whatever is the major length that got passed into the constructor right there, whatever is the major length that got passed into the constructor, take that length, which is the number of dashes, and the label to do that is actually 0. Right there, I'm drawing the actual 0 on my screen. Once I've drawn 0, what should I do then? Well, then I need to repeat the same process. I need to repeat the same process for drawing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whatever are the actions going all the way up to whatever is the number of inches that were passed in by the user. So I'm going to have a loop now. That says for j, let's say in range starting from 1. Why starting from 1? Because I've already drawn 0. 0 is already done. It's completed. So let's start from 1. Going all the way up to self dot underscore number of inches. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go. Now, why do I have a plus 1 there? The reason I have a plus 1 there is because, remember, this is the range method. What does range method take in are two parameters starting from 1 going all the way up to 1 plus self number of inches. So if number of inches over here, if this was set to, let's say, 5, okay, what does that mean? It means that the user needs an English ruler that has 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This zero has already been drawn by that line, by that instruction there. So in order to draw 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I'm starting from 1 so that this gets taken care of in the body of this loop, going all the way up to number of inches, which is 5 plus 1. So this parameter, the second parameter over here, is actually 6. But what does range of 1 comma 6 give you? It gives you back a list. It gives you back a list starting from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so now I've got a local variable j. I've got a local variable j that is going to take on these values for every iteration of this loop, here. For every iteration of this loop here, j is going to take on values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep on calling draw line. I'm going to keep on calling draw line so that that line gets actually drawn. Okay, so let's come back to code here and let's complete this. So I'm going to have another call self dot draw line, and now we pass in self dot major length because that remains constant, and I just want the string representation of whatever j happens to be. Okay, at this point you might tell me, Abbas, this is all good. I'm drawing these lines. So what my code is doing as of now is basically doing something like this. Is saying, okay, let's draw 0. Okay, and let's say these are the number of dashes, which happens to be, I don't know, let's just make some number up. So let's say number of inches is 5, and let's say the major length happens to be 4. So what that means is when I'm drawing 0, I'll have something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, and then I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3. Okay, this is all good. I mean, in some extent it is doing the right job, but I'm still missing a very critical component of my English ruler. How am I going to draw the interior here? How am I going to draw this interval here? I need to take care of that interval also. So let's think about this. When does the interval need to get drawn? When does this interval needs to get drawn? It needs to get drawn right after you have done one of these representations. So when the moment I have drawn 0, I must invoke draw interval. I must call draw interval. Okay, I must call draw interval so that this interval, whatever that needs to be, gets drawn. Then I'm going to draw 1, which is right there. Okay, and then I'm going to call draw interval again so that the interval between 1 and 2 gets drawn. So how is this going to reflect in my code here? How is it going to reflect in my code here? The way it's going to get reflected in my code here is that this line over here that I've just done needs to get pushed one lower. Okay, it needs to come on the second line, and in this place I must have something called self dot draw interval. Okay, so let's get that piece in. Remember, I'm doing this iteratively. I want to show you the intuition. Let's not just get the complete code in and then I don't know, then worry about why it actually works the way it is without even understanding how all of these small pieces get put together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press an enter there, get draw line on the next line, and on this current line where my cursor is currently at, I'm going to say self dot draw interval. And what I'm going to pass in now is that this interval that you happen to draw, I'm going to give you the major length. I'm going to give you the major length, which is going to be one less. It's going to be one less than what you started with. Okay, why is that? Because if you go back to my first video and look at the interval, the way the interval gets drawn, the very first interval gets drawn is one less dash than the outer interval. So again, if I were to just show you quickly so that you don't get lost in this video, is that if the outer happened to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, and then the next integer representation happened to be the next inch integer representation happened to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, halfway between 0 and 1, it's not going to have a label. You're not going to put a label for 0.5. But what you're going to do is to represent that kind of visually, you're going to have just 3 dashes there. These were 4 dashes. This is going to have just 3 dashes. If I go halfway between, or if I draw the interval between 0 and zero point 0.5, the halfway mark is going to have 2 dashes. So what I'm saying at this point is, because you have just drawn this part, because you have just drawn 0 right there, which happen to have a major length of 4, and now you're in the process of drawing the interval, this interval between 0 and 1. Because in the process of drawing that, the next major length in that interval is going to be 1 less than what you started with. If I started with 4, 4 minus 1 is going to give me 3, which makes sense because if this was the original interval length, sorry, so this was the original picture between 0 and 1, halfway between that, I'm going to have three dashes. So this is going to be 4 minus 1, meaning this entire thing over here. I'm going to draw the interval with a major length of 3. Okay, so now that I know what the interval is supposed to do, the draw interval is supposed to do, we can now complete this method. So I'm going to say over here, if the center length, as long as the center length is more than 0, meaning I can keep on drawing the intervals, I can keep on doing the intervals. Okay, so let's again think about this. If the center length is greater than 0, okay, what does this mean? It means that if my, okay, so again, it's important that I always keep track of my ruler here. So if this was 1 2 3 4 0, 1 2 3 4 1, and halfway between them is 1 2 and 3. Okay, so far this instruction has taken care of drawing 0. Now my next, if I were to print again something, it's going to get printed right there, just after that 0, whatever the next cursor is, or wherever the next line is, that's where the print statement is going to get hit. So if I call print again, it's just going to print something just after the previous print instruction, right? It's just going to print on a new line, meaning it's going to go to the next line. So what I'm saying here is, okay, if the center length, right, in this case, the center length is actually 3 here. Okay, and I'm in the process of drawing an interval. I'm trying to draw an interval here. The way you're going to draw this interval is that this center length of 3 is going to be set at this point right there. This is center length of 3. Okay, but before I come there, I still need to do some drawing between these two halves here. Remember, this is still needs to be done. I still need to do the drawing right there. So what I'm going to say inside draw underscore interval is that before you actually draw that line which has a center length of 3, which is this line right there, before you do that, I would like you to call draw interval again. At this point, I'm going to say first thing, draw interval again. I'm going to pass in something which is center length minus 1. And then after this draw interval has been called, in theory that should take care of all the rendering that needs to happen between in this interval here. Meaning it will take care of drawing the halfway mark, which is with these 2 dashes there, and then between 1 dash and 1 dash over there. Once it has taken care of all that thing, then I'm in position to do this drawing of that line. So my next instruction will be draw line, where I'm going to pass in the actual whatever center length happens to be CL. But after I've drawn this line, what I need to do is again draw the second interval. I need to draw this other interval right there. How do I draw this interval over here? Well, I'm going to draw that interval again by calling draw draw interval passing in CL minus 1. Okay, so keep this intuition in mind as we complete the code here. So as I complete the code here, I'm going to say self dot draw interval and pass in center length minus 1. Then I'm going to say at this point, I'm going to say self dot let's draw a line, which is draw line, and I'm going to say this line will be of length center length, and then I'm going to say self dot draw interval again for center length of minus 1. Okay, So let's just make sure everything is okay. Uh, all right, so I've got my constructor. Let's just make sure I've got my, get them all indented correctly. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is we're in a position to actually test this code out. So let's go back to our main block. Let's go back to our main block here. And let's say I would like to draw a ruler. Okay, I'm going to say draw underscore underscore ruler and see what happens now. So let's save our code. Okay, everything seems to be okay. Let's go back to our module, right click on it, click on learning exceptions, and I have a bug in my code here. All right, so no attribute major length. All right, so that happens to be on line number 22. This is line 22 right there, and there you go. I need an underscore underscore to get my measure length. All right, so let's run this again. And what I have here is an actual drawing of my English ruler right there. This is my English ruler right there that has been finally rendered in Python. And you can see this code. You can see this code that has been, you can see this actual rendering here that every integer representation of my ruler has a label. So there's a label 0 there. I have a label 1 at that point. I have another label 2. So every integer has a label of 2. These are the major length. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this has a major length of 5. This has a major length of 5. This has a major length of 5. But as I go halfway between 0 and 1, or halfway between 1 and 2, the major length at that point reduces by 1. So major length now is 4 at that point. Over here, major length is 4, and you get the idea. So I hope this was useful. I hope this was useful for trying to put some code together that is a collection of a week one's material on object-oriented programming, and some of the material that we've been learning this week on recursion.